Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning and greetings from Pakistan. Let me begin by expressing my sincere apologies for my inability to be with you in person today due to a conflicting commitment, but I'm very honored to be part of your discourse today and want to thank you for this invitation. Let me also at the outset congratulate the UK Academy of Medical Sciences and the Academy of Science of Malaysia for their commitment to address one of the foremost global development challenges. The epidemic of obesity is now recognized as one of the most important public health problems facing the world today. Tragically, adult obesity today is more common globally than undernutrition. Today, around 2 billion adults are overweight. Of these, 670 million are obese, and around 98 million are severely obese. We know that if the current trends continue, it is estimated that by 2025, 2.7 billion adults will be overweight, over 1 billion will be obese, and around 177 million will be severely affected by obesity. We also know that today 127 countries have high rates of obesity, and in 63 countries, rates are rapidly increasing. Many of you must have read the recent Lancet paper, which provides a comprehensive picture of trends in adult BMI. The analysis has basically shown that if current trends continue, by 2025, global obesity prevalence will reach 18% in men and surpass 21% in women. And severe obesity will surpass 6% in men and 9% in women. It is, of course, clear that gender differences in obesity rates can be understood as a reflection of underlying gender inequality and socioeconomic factors. This is clearly astounding and will have implications for public health and initiatives to promote gender equality, which we know can reset the balance with respect to nutritional health and well-being, not just of women, but of future generations everywhere. But these figures will also have implications for clinical care, because currently treatment for adult obesity adds up to 20% of the country's healthcare costs, which will escalate over time, placing additional burdens on already stretched health systems. Ladies and gentlemen, today I want to give you two snapshots of my recent personal experience relating to the obesity problem. The first relates to my role as co-chair of the WHO Commission on Ending Childhood Obesity. The report of the WHO Commission on Ending Childhood Obesity, which was published in early 2016, was arguably the first report in line with the spirit of the Sustainable Development Goals. Amongst other things, the Sustainable Development Goals expand the spectrum of development priorities from what was once a sole focus on undernutrition and food security to one that now includes food quality, equity, and food systems. So in a sense, it focuses on malnutrition in all its forms. And for good reason, because if one looks at the global statistics, we simply see problems at both ends of the malnutrition spectrum. Today, approximately 462 million adults worldwide are underweight, but on the other hand, almost 2 billion are also overweight or obese, in fact 2.7 billion. Communities still struggling with growth, stunting rates of up to 30% are now witnessing a rise in obesity and related disease. In the same family, children experience wasting while older family members struggle with overweight. In low and middle income countries with emerging economies, almost 5 million children continue to die of undernutrition-related causes every year. Yet simultaneously, these same populations are now witnessing a rise of childhood overweight and obesity, increasing at a rate 30% faster than in richer nations. For your region, Asia in particular, where 48% of all the overweight children live, there is an additional risk, because with the rapid social and nutrition transitions ongoing, even more children are at the risk of developing childhood obesity. Since childhood obesity leaves an indelible mark, there's a risk that a generation of children will continue into adulthood with all the associated non-communicable disease risks. So it was within this context that in 2014, as the Sustainable Development Goals were in the final stages of being negotiated, the WHO Commission on Ending Childhood Obesity was established, and myself and Sir Peter Klugman from New Zealand had the honor of co-chairing the commission. Our commission's work came to fruition in January 2016, and its report was the culmination of a 2-year process which involved face-to-face discussions with more than 100 countries in all regions of the world, several non-state actor hearings, 2 open online consultations, and input from 2 expert working groups. In our report, we clearly stated that childhood obesity has the potential to negate many of the health gains made over the last decade. As a commission, we adopted a life course approach to the commission's recommendations, and we made a strong call to tackle the obesogenic environment throughout the life course. As a commission, we emphasized that childhood obesity is a complex, multidimensional problem, and that its prevention and control is a shared responsibility between many sectors. The Commission emphasized evidence which shows that the behavioral and biological responses of a child to the obesogenic environment can be shaped by processes even before birth, placing an even greater number of children on the pathway to becoming obese when faced with an unhealthy diet and low physical activity. In outlining the actions and responsibilities for implementing our 6 recommendations, we chose to espouse a whole-of-society approach in which all actors, government, parents, NGOs, and the private sector take shared responsibility and work together to effect change. Our commission recognized the important role the private sector can play in addressing childhood obesity. As a commission, we believed that progress can be made if all actors remain dedicated to working together. But we underscored that this requires commitment, long-term investment, and innovation if we are to achieve our collective goal of ending childhood obesity. And we must remember that if we commit and deliver on this goal, we will not only ensure the health and well-being of our children, but we will also contribute to the Sustainable Development Goals, especially Goal 2.2, which challenges us to end all forms of malnutrition by 2030, and Goal 3.4, which specifically calls for reducing by 1/3 premature mortality from non-communicable diseases. I applaud your efforts to convene today in the pursuit of these goals. Ladies and gentlemen, my other experience relating to obesity is with respect to my recent role as one of the 3 shortlisted nominees for Director General of the World Health Organization. As you may be aware, over the last 18 months, I had the extraordinary privilege of going around the world as one of the 3 nominees for WHO DG. In that role, I met 191 country delegations, most of them at the Minister of Health level, and some of them also at the Foreign Minister and Head of State level. I went to 67 capitals physically. And in my interactions, both during the meetings as well as during the official roundtables of the Director General nominees, I continue to highlight the importance of addressing non-communicable diseases and its risk factors, including obesity. I'm sure you know that obesity doesn't afflict an individual in isolation. It has a number of dangerous companions. Obesity-related disorders like diabetes, heart disease, hypertension, and some cancers, which we collectively refer to as non-communicable diseases, threaten every country across the globe. Many of you must be aware that non-communicable diseases account for an estimated 38 million deaths annually, They are estimated to incur a projected economic loss of $47 trillion over the next 15 years if no action is taken against them. The good news is that contrary to what many of you may believe, there's a lot of awareness about NCDs within governments at the levels of ministers of health, and in some cases, even at the head of state level. And contrary to what you may believe, there's a huge appetite to act. In many parts of the world, during my meetings, to my surprise, NCDs was the opening item on the agenda. I saw real concern in the tone of the ministers of health when they asked my views on how agencies could support them better. I could sense what was fueling their concern, because on my campaign visits, I also visited hospitals, hospices, and palliative care centers to see the footprint of NCDs globally. And I was pleasantly surprised to see that the ministers of health and the country's delegations really had a genuine appetite to act and a genuine awareness about the scale of the problem. But this shouldn't come as a surprise to us, because country needs and priority surveys, particularly those conducted by the World Health Organization, have consistently rated NCDs at the top of their list of priorities. The fact of the matter is that as an international community, we have failed countries as far as NCDs are concerned. Let's take a quick look back into history to see why I'm saying this. Since the days of tropical medicine, the mix of 3 ingredients have overseen global health success: a dedicated institution, a clear strategy, and dedicated funding. This is also why the 2001 political declaration for HIV and AIDS, which is the first time when heads of state united at the UN General Assembly to fight a disease, we saw a lot of momentum being sparked. But when the heads of state came together for the second time in the history of the world in 2011 and united behind NCDs politically, nothing much ensued. The fact is that countries have gotten used to the politically attractive, clear asks and physical envelopes and hand-holding from initiatives like Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, the Global Fund to fight AIDS, TB, and malaria, and PEPFAR. But between different frameworks, framings, and negotiated agreements, the NCD's messaging is complicated, and there is still no dedicated institutional support or funding. NCDs rarely feature in international agency narratives. And the current push for NCDs, which is centered on fiscal and trade measures, which we know can have significant impact, is outside of the control of ministers of health and often opposes the agendas of their cabinet colleagues. During my interactions with 191 countries, I found ministers of health more than willing to tackle NCDs. But they shared that they are up against their parliaments and their finance and trade ministers and the international community in their countries, because NCDs do not feature on their list of priorities. They feel powerless because there are no multi-stakeholder mechanisms and platforms for private-public convening to tackle the challenges. So we need a strong global mechanism to give prominence to NCDs, to radically change the response to the NCD and obesity pandemic. We need to give NCDs and obesity more prominence. At the overarching level, we need to have an apex global entity to give influence and visibility to the issue and to the dividends that we can get through appropriate investments in addressing them. The mechanism must be powerful enough to address one of the world's most pressing and complex problems, one that can convene and forge collaborative division of labor amongst initiatives, groups, apex efforts working for not just for obesity, but around salt, sugar, alcohol, tobacco, diet, and physical activity. The agency must be able to bridge the public-private NCDs chasm because the private sector needs to be part of the solution. It must play the key and missing role of market shaping for NCDs and obesity prevention. It must provide innovative incentives to leverage public and private financing in countries in alignment with the spirit of the Sustainable Development Goals. It must unify technical strands drawing on the myriad science and technology innovations which border on the cusp of NCD prevention and control and tackling obesity. And it must identify policy space for non-communicable diseases within existing initiatives. Ladies and gentlemen, I know that the world is preoccupied with the threat of a pandemic, and there is good reason for that. But action on that and NCDs is not mutually exclusive. During my interaction with the 191 countries, I continued to refer to non-communicable diseases alongside the threat of pandemics, alongside the threat of climate change, and alongside the threat of antimicrobial resistance as one of the 4 threats and challenges which could threaten to wipe out the development gains of the last century. And not once I was challenged as having said something which was not correct. There is a huge appetite within countries domestically to address this challenge, and we as an international community must set up the right arrangements to be able to handhold them and to be able to respond to the needs that they have been raising for some time now. Thank you so much for having me in your midst, and I wish you productive deliberations today.